Hello, I'm Pastor Nanette Christofferson, and along with Pastor Steve Talmadge, we offer these short Bible studies on our lectionary readings. This week, we are in Lent 6, which is known as Palm/Passion Sunday, and I'm going to use the Palm Sunday take on this rather than talk about the Passion, as we'll have Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday talk about those events as well. So let's start with Palm/Passion Sunday, and oftentimes people become confused as to why we have Palm/Passion Sunday. And some people might even argue that it should be Palm Sunday versus Passion Sunday. And well, as Lutherans, we can make it both, which is pretty impressive. Traditionally, Palm Sunday is known as Palm Sunday and stood on its own for a long time. But in the 1970s, this began to slowly change because churches were finding that fewer and fewer people were participating in Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday services. And if all we hear is glory to God as Jesus is entering into Jerusalem and the triumphal entry, and then we go to Easter morning and the glorious resurrection, then we miss a major part of the Passion, of what the Easter story is all about, of how a God who suffered on a cross and died for us. So it's really important that we not leave this part out, and that's why the verses of Passion will be read on Sunday as well. So let's talk about Palm Sunday, and then when you hit church on Sunday, we'll have the Passion Sunday as well. So let's go and take a little background on the text. Our text is Matthew chapter 21, verses 1 through 10. I almost feel like it should be elongated a little bit, but we'll talk about that at the end. As we take a look at this passage, it marks the beginning of Jesus' final week, and we often call this Holy Week. Jesus is entering Jerusalem, the religious and political center of Judea. And the pilgrims are gathering for Passover, remembering liberation from Egypt, and the city is crowded. It is tense and politically charged. And there's some important tensions that we need to keep in mind here that are going on. Rome is watching very carefully because they don't want to see a revolt go on. The Jewish leaders are cautious about unrest. And back to Rome, Pontius Pilate is part of that, and he does not want to see a revolt happen on his dime in his area of that he is in charge of. And the Jewish leaders are very cautious about unrest. They don't want the Roman government coming after them. And the crowd is expectant. The crowd is hoping for a Messiah. So let's read Matthew chapter 21, verses 1 through 5. When they had come near Jerusalem and had reached Bethphage, at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, just say this: 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them immediately." This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet. "Tell the daughter of Zion, 'Look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey.'" The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt, put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and that followed were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" When he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking, "Who is this?" Before we go on, I'd just like to point out that if you noticed in the Gospel of Matthew, in Matthew's version, it's branches that they have cut from trees and they put them down on the road along with people's cloaks. And just something to remember that I believe it's only in John's Gospel that they actually have palm branches. So if we go to the last question, who is this one? Many are expecting this Messiah to overthrow Rome, to restore Israel's power, to rule like King David. But Jesus redefines kingship. Not military, but humble. Not violent, but peaceful. Not dominating, but saving. We also see Old Testament fulfillment, which Matthew's gospel is famous for, and he shows Zechariah 9:9, a king riding a donkey, which signals peace, not war, humility, and divine purpose. I love the artwork in this particular drawing, as the donkey actually looks like it's smiling, like, wow, how blessed is this event, right? So I want us to go over some contrasts. It's always good to remind ourselves. As we look to Zechariah 9:9, we see a fulfillment of prophecy, and Matthew's gospel is always trying to make those connections for us. And Matthew explicitly connects Jesus to prophecy. Your king comes to you, humble, riding on a donkey. And we have a key contrast here between a different kind of a kingdom. When we look to earthly kings, we see war horses, we see power and conquest and fear. But when we look to Jesus' kingdom, it's different. This donkey means you ride in humility, and the purpose is humility and peace, and not fear, but gentleness. Or even we could contrast that with peace and love as well. As we turn to verses 6 and 7, the disciples obey and prepare the colt, what Jesus asked them to do. They place the cloaks on the animal. It's symbolic of honor, submission, and recognition of kingship. The disciples participate without fully understanding. And I think that that's an important point, that there are times in our faith, even in our worship services, that we participate without fully understanding. I think of growing up in the church, and there were certain things that we did, not understanding why we did those things. And even at times it's hard to grasp the mystery of the Eucharist, right? The mystery of communion. And yet we still partake in it. And sometimes it seems like we're not fully grasping the meaning of it. Same with our baptism. We can understand it up to a point, but there's a mystery in it. And we see the disciples following this too without fully understanding all of it. In Matthew's version, you may have picked up on this, Zechariah says to prepare a donkey and a colt, and Matthew's version is the only version of which there are two animals with the donkey. So you can kind of keep that in mind as well, because Matthew wants to make sure that they stick to the prophecy of what was said. In verse 8, we have crowds spread cloaks and branches on the road. The cloaks on the road indicate a royal welcome. The branches equal celebration, possibly nationalistic hope as well, as oftentimes the idea of a Messiah is misplaced, right? So the crowd is responding with excitement, expectation, and misunderstanding. They see a king, but perhaps not the kind of king Jesus is. And I think this is a question we all face ourselves as well. Hosanna to the Son of David, a key phrase. Hosanna means save us now. Son of David brings a messianic title, and blessed is the one. And as we look to it, we see a praise and a plea for rescue. But again, we have a tension here. They cry, save us, but may not understand how Jesus will save them. In verse 10, we see it written that the whole city was in turmoil. And the Greek word implies shaking, agitation, almost like an earthquake. People want to know. Jesus' arrival disrupts everything. Political order, religious assumptions, personal expectations, and the question, who is this? This is the central question of the gospel. And so I'm going to ask you now, who is this Jesus of Nazareth? How do you answer that question? And I'm going to start with, how does this passage redefine what power looks like? All of us, when we think of power, we often think of either weapons or that great argument that will just set somebody and make them be quiet, right? And to show power over someone, slice them with words. And yet, God's love and peace and grace and mercy and compassion are words that can slice a conversation. into silence and make us rethink what this is all about. So in what ways does Jesus disrupt expectations then and now? He disrupts expectations with mercy and compassion, just like he did then and just like he does now. And at times we find this terribly confrontational and afflicting. And at other times we find this disruption brings great comfort. What does this passage reveal about the nature of God's kingdom? Well, as we look to the nature of God's kingdom, it's very different than how we see the world. We can go back to Jesus' time in the wilderness, right? Where Satan is trying to point out to Jesus all the things that should matter to him, right? But they don't, because Jesus is demonstrating a different kind of a kingdom. And as we look to this entry into Jerusalem, how does this story prepare us for Holy Week? I think it prepares us by asking us, who is this one? Who is he? And as we walk through this Holy Week, we can be reminded of what Christ accomplished on the cross, but we can also be reminded that oftentimes this Jesus isn't the Jesus who we want him to be. And how many times would we have loved it if while he was hanging on the cross, all of a sudden, boom, he came to life, right? But that's not how it works. And that's would defeat God's purpose. Because through the cross we see a suffering Son. And it is in our suffering that Christ is holding us close. So as we begin to think about Holy Week and all of the activity that goes on with it, I hope that you consider participating in all of our services, meaning come and worship, and that you can enter into this Holy Week with new eyes and be open to what God might be asking of you, or telling you, or sharing with you the depths of his love. I pray that you have extra time this week to spend in meditation and to participate in our worship services. Blessings on your journey.